All right. So when you're looking at the A value, you're always going to have A values that are bigger than 1. So when we're in this particular unit, you're only going to ever exceed vertical stretches. All right. Now, if A is negative, it's going to flip over the x-axis. All right. So that's the effect of A. All right. Now, the next one was what we did 2 days ago. That was K. And that's what moved it up and down. Okay, so these all belong together. All right, and the K gave you the horizontal asymptote and the K gives you the range. K is up and down. Yeah, it's the horizontal asymptote and the range. So that's these right here. All right, and then what we did yesterday was the H value. Okay, and that's what moves it right and left. Okay, and then that affects, so that's kind of like how everything fits together and what they affect. And then Monday we'll get to this horizontal shrink and stretch stuff. All right. So we're starting with this graph right here, and we want to identify its asymptotes as dotted lines, and then write the domain and the range. Okay. So what I usually do is I just write what are the parameters. So I've got an A, that's 12. Okay, and what that's going to do is vertically stretch it. So that's going to be a vertical stretch. By a factor of 12. And the way that I achieve that is I take my y coordinates, I take all the y coordinates and I multiply them by 12. All right, now I've got an h of, remember, this is bizarro world here. So I see a +1, but that tells me then the h value is really -1. So this is going to be a shift to the left, even though it says +1. And the way that I do that is I take my x coordinates and I subtract 1. And the h gives me my vertical asymptote and my domain. Vertical asymptote is at -1. So the graph is never going to cross that line, that vertical line. So that means the domain will never have a -1 in it. And then finally, our K is going to be 2. Shift our horizontal asymptote. And our range. Y, there will never be a place where the graph has a coordinate where the Y is a negative. All right. Any questions at home or out there, out here in class? All right, so I got a vertical at -1. Then you label it. Okay, and I got horizontal at -2. Oh, this should be 1. Okay, all right, now we'll just do our anchor points. And then you just got to be careful because the order matters in which you do these. All right, so if I take the points like 1, 1, okay, so I got the points 1, 1, and I got the point -1, -1 from the parent chart. Okay. All right, now the order in which you do these. If you look up here, guys, there's 2 of these things that have something to do with the vertical aspect of the graph. All right, so on this first one here, this A affects something that's vertical about the graph, and then the K affects something that's vertical about the graph. Anytime, this is important, folks, anytime you've got 2 transformations that are working in the same direction, this affects the vertical and this affects the vertical, you do the one that is multiplication first. So when I get ready to do the vertical stuff, I have to do this multiplying by 12 before I do this -2. Because these are competing transformations and multiplication trumps addition or subtraction. Okay, so I didn't write it down on this, but this one right here, to shift down to, you take your y coordinate and you -2. So to graph this correctly, whatever order I end up doing it in, this multiplying by 12 has to happen before I subtract 2 from the y coordinate. Okay, now to start it, okay, if we were doing this problem, here's how we could do this problem. I'll show you there's a lot of different ways. I could shift it left. You don't need to write this down, but I could shift left 1. Then I would stretch by 12, and then I would I'd slide 2 down. So I could do left 1, and then stretch by 12, and then slide 2 down. Or left 1, left. Or you could do it in this order. You could stretch by 12, then you could go 2 down, and then you could go 1 left. As long as, since these two are both vertical stuff, you stretch it before you slide it. Okay? Are there questions on understanding that? On the order in which you do these? How about at home, guys? Because that can be kind of confusing. Hey, I didn't let you sit there so you can check around. Okay? All right. Okay, so let's graph it now. So what we're going to do is if the way that I evaluate it, I just work as if I was putting a number in here. So if I put a number in for X, I'm going to do this first, which is the sliding 1 left. So I'm going to take this point and I'm going to slide it 1 to the left. And I'm going to slide this one 1 to the left. Yes. Oh, okay. Because the parent function of this goes through 1, 1. Goes through -1, 1. Negative 1. The parent function of this graph is 1 over x. That's what it looks like. So when you're graphing these, you take these 2 points and then you do these different things to them, and that tells you where the new points are. So it depends on the shape. So if this was the shape, if it was a squared, then the points I'd use would be 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, negative 1, 1. You know, those are on a parabola. Yeah. So it all depends on what kind of equation it is. For all of these, it's always 1 over x. These are all reciprocal equations. All righty. Okay, so here we go. We got that. So now we got to do, you've got a vertical, you're going to multiply by 12, and then you're going to subtract 2. You can't do it the other way. You can't subtract 2 and then multiply by 12. Multiplying is more important than subtracting, and both of these are working on a vertical part of the graph. Oh, to make this easier, let's not make it 12. I remember, because it won't fit on the graph. So let's just make it like a 6 so it fits on the graph. So change this to a 6, guys. Otherwise, it's too big. Okay. All right, so I'm going to multiply by 6, and then I'm going to subtract 2. I'm going to multiply by 6, and then I'm going to subtract 2. These are the 2 points that I end up plotting. So this goes to 0, 4, and And I write down what those coordinates are on my drawing. And -2, -8. Graph. If I do, okay, so to the x coordinate, that's right here. I took the x coordinate and I subtracted 1. Okay, that was this one right here. That's what I did to the x's. And then the y coordinates, okay, I got to do a multiplying by 6 and I've got to do a subtract by 2. All right, and multiplying trumps. When I get to this point with the 2 verticals transformations, I do the one that involves multiplying first. If I had 2 transformations that work the graph right and left, I would do the one that uses multiplication first. Okay. All right. So our next one here, there's actually 4 things that are happening to it. Okay. All right. So here you got an A value that's a negative number. Right? So that ends up doing 2 things to the graph. It stretches it and it flips it over the x-axis. Okay. So this is gonna be a vertical stretch. By a factor of 4. And it's also going to take the graph and flip it over the x-axis. Question? So the way that I get this done is I take my y coordinates and I multiply them by negative. That's what we're going to do to make this happen. All right. Now we've got an h of positive 4. Any questions on why that's positive 4, not negative 4? Yeah, bizarro world. And you watch Seinfeld. That's a nod to Seinfeld. All right. So this now is going to be a shift for right. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take the x coordinates and we're going to add 4. So right now, if we were just to do these two, it wouldn't matter which one we did first, because one of them works on the Y and the other one works on the X. The order doesn't matter. It's when they're working on the same coordinate that the order matters. Right? Now we got our VA and our domain. Okay, so this is going to be 4 and X. Okay, and then finally, the K is a -4. So that's a shift 4 down. We achieve that by taking the Y coordinate and subtracting. So now we've got competing transformations. This works on the Y coordinate and this works on the Y coordinate. You have to do the one that uses multiplication first. So when I get ready to do these two, I've got to do the multiplying by -4 before I do the subtracting 4. I can do this one anytime. I can do it at the beginning, I can do it at the end, as long as the multiplying here is before this subtracting. Okay, and then stuff here. All right, and now let's do our anchors. 1, 1, -1. Okay, so here's my order for doing it. I'm going to work from the inside out. So if I was plugging a number into this, the first thing I would do would be I would be doing this denominator. Well, that denominator represents shifting 4 to the right. So I'm going to do this one first. Okay. Then I'm left with these two. I have to do the one that uses multiplication before I do the one that uses addition or subtraction. So that's the order in which we're going to do this. Okay. Questions on that part? How you, well, the order is like when you learned order of operations, you know that multiplying is more powerful than adding and subtracting. So the only time the order matters is when you've got more than one transformation working on the same coordinate. So for example, on this one, I've got a Y coordinate getting multiplied by -4, and I've got a Y coordinate having 4 subtracted from it. So when I get ready to work on the Y coordinate, I've got to do the multiplying before I do the subtracting. Okay, this x coordinate one, it doesn't matter. I can do this before I start, or I can do it at the end. I would still get the right answer, as long as this multiplying was before this subtracting. Okay? Alrighty. So let's see. We'll take our, all right, so I got 1, and I am going to add 4 to it. I got -1, I'm going to add 4 to it. Okay, and then for the y, I'm going to multiply it by -4, and then I'm going to subtract 4. Multiply by -4, -4, subtract 4, -8. Okay. Multiply by -4, that would give me +4, subtract 4, okay, and then we just graph. So let's see, VA at 4. Now we got an HA at -4. Got a 5, -8. And we got us a 3, 0. Yes. Okay, so I got 2 things that work on the y coordinates. I have to do the one that is multiplying first. So between the first and the third one, I'm going to do this first. So I go 1 times -4 is -4, and then -4 minus 4 is 8, -8. Okay, our last one, before we can even solve the or start graphing this, we're going to rewrite it so that we can see what the true transformations that are occurring, because you see how the x is written second. All right, so I can rewrite this. I know that 2 minus x is the same as -x plus 2. Now, when we're writing these equations, or these functions, I always want the coefficient on the x to be a positive one, not a negative one. So before I write this into the equation, I'm going to factor out a -1, and I'm left with x minus 2. Now, when I write it like that, it's going to reveal what the true transformations are. So this is going to be -x, and then I've got x minus 2, and then I got plus 1. All right, so what's happening in this equation is my a value is 1, so there's no, that has no effect, because that's what the original mother function is. The mother function is the a value is 1. Okay, now you have a b value that's a -1, so that's new. Now, what that does, when b is -1, it's going to take our graph and flip it over the y-axis right here. When b is negative, it's going to flip the graph over the y-axis. All right, so that's the effect of that. So this is, I'm going to flip over the y-axis. Okay, and then I'm going to, so to do that, I take the x coordinates and I multiply them by -1. All right, now I go up here and I look at my h and it's a 2. Remember, this is bizarro world, so I see -2, but I think of that as a +2. So h is 2. So that means I'm going to slide 2 right. And I do that by taking the x coordinate and multiplying it by, adding 2. And now that gives me my vertical asymptote. My domain. Now, if you look at these last two functions had something to do with the x's. So when I get ready to do these in a minute, the one that uses multiplication gets done first. It gets done before this one. All right. Okay, and then finally, I got a k of 1. Okay, and the way that I do that slide is I'm going to take my y coordinate and I am going to add 1 to it. All right, so the order in which I'm going to do these different transformations, since this is the only one that works on y, I could do it before or I could do it after these two. It doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to do these two and then I'm going to do the slide at the end. So this is going to be third. Okay, so we draw our asymptotes. And okay, and then we get our points. All right, I'm going to take the x coordinates and I'm going to multiply them by 1, -1, and then I'm going to add 2. So this is 1 times -1 plus 2, and that's going to give me 1. I'm going to do the same thing to this x coordinate. Multiply this by -1, that gives me 1, add 2, I get 3. Okay, the y coordinate's a little less work. I am simply going to add 1. And then I'm going to plot those guys. So my first point is at 1, 2. And my other point's at 3, 0. That's my graph. Okay.